we're going to start. Hello, everyone. Hi, I'm Titi Ngwenya, Director of Communications at Fuller Craft Museum in Brockton, Massachusetts. And I'd like to welcome you to another installation of Craft Chat, this time with artists Jodi Colella and Merill Comeau. And they'll talk about their creative experience working on the exhibition Human Impact, Stories of the Opioid Epidemic. For those of you who have joined us, we ask that you mute your audio and turn off your video. And after the presentation, we will have a brief Q&A. So we'll be taking your questions for today using the chat feature in Zoom. So just if you look at the bottom of your screen, there's a button, a chat button, and to the side of your screen, there's a chat box. Feel free to enter your questions there. We will ask as many of those questions as possible during the Q&A. And also, we are recording the session, so we will make it available on our YouTube channel and with a link on our website and social media for anyone who could not attend this chat session. Here to tell you more about the impactful exhibition, and our guest artist today is Chief Curator of Exhibitions and Collections at Fuller Craft Museum, Beth McLaughlin.
Thank you, Titi. It's really such a pleasure for me to be here today. I'd like to thank everybody for coming. This is very exciting and also comforting to be sharing the room with you all as we hear from Jodi and Merill about human impact, stories of the opioid epidemic. I'd like this to be more of an informal conversation. I may chime in from time to time with a question. But before we get started, I just wanted to give a little bit of background about Human Impact to provide some context. Human Impact is part of a series of exhibitions that we've been doing at Fuller Craft that are geared to probe pressing issues in today's society. And certainly I think we can all agree that the opioid epidemic is one of the largest health crises of our time. And we wanted to develop this exhibition to cultivate awareness about the epidemic, to destigmatize addiction. It was important that we provided a place for the community to come to have a dialogue about the opioid epidemic. And we also wanted to give artists a platform to have a voice and to affect change through their work as it relates to this epidemic. Knowing the complexities of the crisis, we developed a partnership team early on to help guide and to inform the process for us. That team consists of Fuller Craft Museum, Brockton Hospital, the Plymouth County DA's office, High Point Treatment Center, Stonehill College, and project advisor Susan Friedman. It was important to everyone on the team that there was authenticity to the project, and we really wanted to make sure that we reflected the many voices in an authentic way. And so early on in the process, we decided the best framework to make that happen would be to bring together a group of artists that Fuller Craft Museum would select through a call for entries with families and individuals that had been impacted by the opioid epidemic. And that's where High Point Treatment Center did a fabulous job of identifying their clients that would be willing to have these intimate conversations with the artists, so that the artists could then go back to their studios to create work that spoke to the personal stories of the opioid epidemic, but also the larger global issues of this crisis. And we brought the families and the artists together in November of 2018. It was a very powerful night. Then the artists went back to their studios to create work, and we opened the exhibition in October of 2019. I wanted to take a moment to thank all of the artists that are in the exhibition: Deborah Barones, David Bogus, John Christian Anderson, Ava Camacho Sanchez, Holly Roddenberry, Natasha Morris, Steve Lohr, Deborah Santoro, Jessica Scoltetti, and of course Jodi Colella and Merill Comeau. And I wanted to share my screen. So here we are, right as you walk into the gallery, and I can just say from left to right, we have Deborah Barones' piece, John Christian Anderson, Jodi Colella, Steve Lohr, and Jessica Scoltetti. Moving back in the gallery, we have Holly Roddenberry, Natasha Morris, John Christian Anderson. This is our title wall, and then also Deborah Baronis's piece. This is the back wall of the space with John Christian Anderson's work. And then in the middle of the wall is Merill Comeau's textile. And then of course we have Steve Lohr's sculpture on the right. Looping through, this is the desk by Deborah Santoro with a gorgeous printed material on the top. And then of course Eva Camacho Sanchez, her monumental textile. David Bogus' work here on the left, and also you see it here in the gallery view, flanked by Eva Camacho Sanchez's textile, and of course Jodi Colella. And then our two guests here today, we have Merill Comeau's textile, and then Jodi. So I thought that was a great way to end the gallery tour. Now, of course, you know, Jodi and Merill came to the project as friends, and I thought it would be really interesting to hear their perspective, both as artists and also friends working on the same project at the same time. And I'm so thrilled that they're here today to kind of pull back the curtain on the process, and I really can't wait to hear from them. But before I do, just want to run down some brief bio information. Merill is a fiber artist who uses discarded textiles to create installations, wall hangings, paintings, and garments that mine autobiographical and socio-political issues to connect individual experiences to the universal. Her work transmits memories and symbolizes lives lived, while also addressing anxiety around the consumer cycle, global manufacturing, and the environment. Her work has been featured in over 80 exhibitions. She has been a guest artist and speaker at many academic institutions, and she's been featured in numerous publications. Merill teaches at the Elliott School of Applied Arts and Crafts in Boston, and also for the Massachusetts Department of Youth Services. Jodi uses needlework to infuse renewed power to craft practices. Both her sculptures and interactive installations capture the sublime of human nature while also creating mindful connections to foster change. Jodi exhibits and teaches internationally, is a member of the Boston Sculptors Gallery, and is a recipient of the 2019 Mass Cultural Council Fellowship Award for Sculpture. She exhibits extensively, both locally and abroad, and she is the founder of the fiber study group, Fiber Lab. Jodi's taught throughout the US and internationally, and she has upcoming workshops in Greece and Australia, which hopefully will be able to take place given the pandemic and everything that's happening with that. So I want to thank them both again for being here and looking forward to diving in. And I thought a really good place to begin would be at the beginning. And I'd love to hear from both of them about how they found out about the project, what was it that appealed to them, and let's just dive in from there.
I found out about it from you, Beth, and was very interested in it because of both Merill and my belief how art is a very good tool to use when you want to communicate important issues or connect. And Merill was on a residency, and I thought of her too because we do a lot of similar work. Okay, so my piece is called Once Was, and it relates to the family I was working with, who was a single mom who lost her son to an overdose, and it had been a pretty recent event. And the pain was palpable, and she clearly needed to be able to talk to somebody and express all her pain and frustration that she went through during the course of the progression of the disease to the unfortunate death of her son. And it kind of shook me up tremendously, and I felt a huge responsibility to figure out how I could get across this information, because it occurred to me that I'm talking to one family and it had affected so many. So that's why I came up with these remembrance poppies, where they represent each one of these poppies created from donated clothing from people who I talked to about this, sharing information and educating. Each one of these poppies represents 200 individuals who have died from an overdose due to opioid-related problems. And there's 3,600 of them on two sides. It's 5 feet wide, 12 feet tall. And it's called Once Was. Oh, I loved this time I had with Jared. He's such a sweetheart. And it's called Once Was because I was inspired by a poem written by the mom that I worked with, who was the family of the young man who died from an overdose. And so it's a memorial. It's meant to be joyous because the joyous as well as solemn. The little mouths represent the individuals, the clothing represents life, and the black velvet that comes through the voids is the sort of funerary part of the whole thing. So that's my, great time installing with the great crew at Fuller Craft. Merill?
So I had a very different family experience. That was one of the things that was so interesting about this process, and why Jodi and I were so lucky to be both colleagues and friends during this project, because it's a very overwhelming topic, and the varieties of human experience is quite broad, and there's a lot to process. And because we both, Jodi and I feel, really want to honor the people that were asked to do visual communication about. So, my person was a single woman who had reunited with her high school boyfriend and felt later in life that she was finally, with the love of her life again, and addiction destroyed that relationship. And my person's person was still alive, but not in treatment. And I also have a very close friend whose family is coping with addiction, as the disease of addiction as well within their family. And I feel like I've had experiences of what it's like to live with the disease. So my work really focused on the treatment process. So there is a treatment process. It's a difficult process. You have to change the chemistry of your brain, but it is well worth the effort. So in my piece, it starts, this particular image is at the top, and that's a gold bikini that I made. The previous image was composted fabric, because the composted fabric was more of the way that you lose your senses, your perception of color as your brain gets taken over by this disease. And this shows more of the destructive part. And as you're falling apart, as your brain is falling apart. And then as you go through, so in my piece, it starts with the seduction at the bottom. And as you go through the losing of your senses and then putting on the overalls, which are get to work. It's the hard work of climbing. And these overalls also represent my person's person, because when I asked what garment would represent her person, she immediately said carpenter overalls, because he could build anything. So as it goes up, it goes into, the person, it's well worth the hard work as you go through that climb. Oh, this is me stitching it in the studio. As you go to the top, eventually you basically strip off even your string bikini to show your naked self through treatment, and to accept yourself and all your flaws. And you regain your senses, so it becomes colorful and magical. So this is it being installed, and yeah, it was really fun. This is the first time I've had a bucket truck, and great staff at the Fuller to walk you through the whole thing. Well, I think we could add to that. Jodi and I could probably talk too about one of the things that was unique about this experience was the preparation and training that we received. So before after we were told that we were part of the group, we received an incredible reading list, and it had videos on it as well. And Jodi and I read books on this topic, like Dope Sick and Dreamland and Junkie, and shared notes about it. we met on site together, all the artists, and had a wonderful training by the organization that right, that was a partner and prepared for us a whole presentation. And we were able to learn about things like the language around this issue, language that doesn't dehumanize or stigmatize.
So we could have the vocabulary and sensitivity when we were working with the families, because it was sort of important. A lot of this project is about raising awareness and also providing education and communicating all the different levels and faces and situations that are involved in something like this.
And it's unique to learn together in that way. I mean, often as artists, we'll do our own individual research and learning, but and then we followed that with an event where we met the families. So it was a nice experience from before it started right through into the beginning. And that initial phase we could talk about a little bit. Jodi and I went straight from that initial training to a local bar and sat up and had a glass of wine and really talked about the seriousness of the topic and our sense of responsibility that we really honor the experience of the people that we talked to. And it was quite a bit to process. Wouldn't you say, Jodi?
Yeah, we had to unpack all of our emotions and in a way, and it was so helpful to have somebody who you already knew and trusted and actually, quite frankly, went through the same experience relatively as you did, so that we could unpack it in a way so that we could process it. Because like Merill said, there was a huge responsibility to communicate a meaningful message as a part of awareness raising and education, and also honor the fact that they were incredibly brave to come forth and share this information. It was harrowing to really sort of witness what they were going through. And so, yeah, that's what it was like right afterwards. It took us a while to actually get to a point where we could find the mediums that we needed to get an idea across, but that we would spend a lot of time doing that together.
Yeah, I think too, we talked about, I did some visual brainstorming with my person during the interview. And you got a lot of poetry that was inspiring to you. The title actually of my piece, I Cry at the Joyous Parts and I Cry at the Sad Parts, came from my person's words. Those bits of information, we both were taking it very seriously and thinking a lot about the materials. So we both are very material oriented. And so how to match our materials with what we wanted to express. And then whether or not there would be whether it would be abstract or there would be representational imagery in it. And it was very nice to, in part because the topic is so serious, was nice to have someone to process that with. I appreciated it, Jodi, that we could talk like that. I work with textiles in part because we are swaddled when we're born and we're wrapped in textiles for our entire lives. So it very much to me refers to the body and human experience and passage of time and the challenges of life. So I knew I would be working in textiles, and I also wanted to use garments as symbolic. So garments as symbolic of the seductress. That's actually my mother-in-law's ball gown, velvet ball gown. And my person just came out with this perfect symbol of the carpenter pants, and then the idea of the bikini. So, and the textiles really, the processes that those textiles went through, depending on the phase, very much reflected like a process of what you might go through. So, the top is this crazy quilt because you still have a lot that you have to work on with your brain, but it's bright colors and it's got sequins and so forth because your life really becomes joyous again. And your brain is putting together the pieces in contrast to the composted and rusted and deconstructed fabric that's in the bottom section, which has to be, was painstakingly stitched together. So, and I think Jodi has similar issues with the materials that she uses.
Yeah, in my work, I like to call myself a sculptor who uses soft materials, and that usually means textiles and fiber. I also like to use found objects. And so in the case of my work, I found a lot of agency in the clothing that was donated to me by people who I had the opportunity to interact with, to discuss the project, share their stories, and educate each other on the whole issue. Because they were coming from people's lives. And I wanted to represent the individuals who had passed as victims of this epidemic as alive. And that's the agency in that clothing for me was potent for that. I see the poppy, the Remembrance Poppy, is something that we're all very familiar with in terms of like a veterans or an Armistice Day, in Canada and Great Britain. And so that had a lot of agency as well to represent the loss that this monument was about. So that's where the textiles, and specifically in this particular case, came into play for me.
Both Jodi and I work large, and what was great about having her on this, another thing that was great about having a relationship during this process is I definitely get to a point of fatigue because I've worked on something for so long and I'm so concerned about it being a good representation, a good visual communication in respect for the people that I'm talking about in my work. And I got to a point of fatigue and I sent out an SOS to Jodi. And I was like, can you please come to the studio? I really just need your eyes on this because I'm starting to flag. And sure enough, Jodi came out and she said to me, you know what you have to do. Like, get back on it. Like, she was basically giving me the same advice. Like, the climb is worth it. So get back into your overalls.
Well, I had to talk her off the ledge a little bit and just, I understand you're in the middle. This is overwhelming, but you need to stitch. It was a lot of fun. And of course, I sent out my share of SOSs as well, because I was being buried alive in poppies. 3,600 of them to be precise. And they were, after being created, which was a wonderful meditative 10-month-long process, they needed to be sewn onto the hanging memorial. And so, yeah, I had my moment on the ledge every once in a while, and Merill came to help me with that as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. And I think, there was a lot of courage, certainly on the part of the families that participated, in really pulling back the curtain on their experience and really letting us have a view into that. I also wanted to comment that the artists were also very brave. And I think to expose yourself to an issue that is so painful and so raw, and certainly that's what artists do by nature, but I would like to say that there really was a lot of courage on the part of the artists to participate in the project, and I wanted to applaud them all for participating.
Not only, I think you're right that it is a challenging task for an artist, and it is brave to take on this sort of work, but it's also just such a meaningful honor. I have sort of Jodi gave me these words actually, that I have a trauma-informed practice. And it's really, it's important to me to know that the brain can experience trauma and can recover. And so it's, one of the ways that you recover, and this is true for even the pandemic that's happening right now, is finding meaning in suffering. And that's a lot of what the families that we were dealing with were suffering, and they were going to need to find some kind of meaning in there, and not just the person who has the addiction, who has the disease, but everyone around that person is experiencing trauma. So it's an honor to be asked to translate that into visual terms. And I know Jodi is thought about that a lot as well.
Well, when Beth asks us about our vulnerability in the process of going through this with the families, that's true. We did have like a lot of vulnerability and a lot of courage, and quite frankly, more than I expected. And I think it can feel uncomfortable to be taken within someone's circle of pain, and especially someone who you just met and whose tragic circumstances you're aware of. And I didn't really expect it to the extent that I experienced it. In fact, I was so affected, I really couldn't talk about it other than with Merill. And even with Merill, I was mostly speechless for about a week. And but I see that as a sort of an honor that my family member had the trust in me to take this on for her. And she kept expressing that throughout the extent of the project. Every time I would interact with her for something, for clothing, for poetry, for feedback. And I mean, to this day, I'm still getting emails about her, how pleased she is, and moved, and how much of a healing experience this ended up being for her.
Yeah, and I think that we saw how beautifully everything came together at the opening reception. And, I know for me, that was a really scary thing to be working on this project for so long and not knowing how the families were going to respond to the final works. I mean, for them to see these objects that are essentially, three-dimensional expressions of these personal stories of their loved ones or of their own journey, it was kind of scary not knowing how they would react. But I think, I commend all the artists for articulating their stories in such a beautiful way. And there was not a dry eye in the house at the opening reception. I think all of the families really understood the portent of the works and the significance. And I think it was a really great day.
It was quite nerve-wracking to just not really know for sure if it was going to be something that your family identified with and felt was healing. Right, Merill?
Yes, yes. And, how to be, you don't want to take them down further, how to honor and not devastate your person. And it was very, unfortunately, Jodi's family was unable to attend the opening, right, Jodi?
Yeah.
But my person did come and bring her one of her adult children, and they were very, very moved by it. And actually, there were physical mementos from her person that we inserted in the pockets of the overalls on the day of the opening. So that was a nice exchange, a nice circle to come around to. I think we should give a shout out too to everyone else, all the other artists as well. I mean, the other artists were also took this process really seriously, and really compelling and moving pieces. Yes, and it's really worth going on the virtual tour. So those of you who got the invitation should also have a link to the virtual tour of the exhibit that Beth put together, the Fuller put together. It's really worth seeing all of them.
Yeah, I mean, I think there were 11 of us artists, which means 11 different families, 11 different stories, 11 different situations. And each artist has their own individual material-based practice.
Mm-hmm.
And so to see all of these variables come together in a way, the way they did, that showed compassion and information and, expressed all sorts of families and identities. It was just, I don't think you could ever repeat anything like this. It was very special. So, thanks, Beth and Fuller Craft. Thanks, Beth, for it's your brainchild, and Fuller Craft for pulling it all together, and Stonehill College with your students were participating, and Merill, our favorite person. No, well, we have a lot of favorite people, but one of our favorite people was Lieutenant Dick. I forget his last name.
Linehan.
Yes, from Braintree, I believe. No, Brockton. And he was such a warm soul that pulled us together in a group chat afterwards to help us, and just seemed to have he just personified the whole image that we need to have now in terms of this crisis, which is to have compassion and lend a hand where we can, because even the families who are surviving it, they're left with nothing, and the communities don't have resources either. So we cannot let go of what has happened to cause this and who we should make accountable to take care of this. I mean, that's what this is all about, right?
Well, yeah, I think that's a great segue into talking about, something that we talk about, Jodi, you and I, is how do we evaluate this experience? This responsibility. Did we meet the challenge? What did we personally learn? Do we feel like we got the story across? Do we feel like do the families feel like they were heard? One of the things that we talk about is, are we connecting to the public? So one of the things that we talk about is the space between the object and the viewer, and what is happening, what's the dynamic in there, what's happening between the artwork and the viewer, and are we trying to make change in society, or, are we trying to get information out there? Are we trying to address stigma and evaluate, are we able to use art for social change, social justice?
I believe so. I really believe so. Or, why would we do it, right, Merill? Because it does take so much energy and soul to do it. So we really do believe in the power of communication. And I particularly think textiles and fiber have even more of a leg up on that, but I would be partial, wouldn't I?
And I'll say too,
the other media out there.
What was interesting to me too is in the call for entries, we really wanted to show the multiplicity of craft, and we wanted to include multiple craft media. But by and large, looking at all the submissions, it was heavily weighted towards textiles. And you see that in the final works that are selected for Human Impact. And, I think a lot of that has to do with this history of textiles being a change agent, and textile artists using their craft to have a voice and to comment on social issues. And I think we see that played out beautifully in the show. And also there was this really great consistency between the textiles and the rest of the work. But I just thought that was interesting to see the number of textiles that ended up not only in the submissions, but in the final exhibition.
One of the things that I think was so successful about this experience too is we know it resonated with a wider public because of Jodi's experience of meeting with Jared Bowen and having him do a piece on this. And Beth, you and I went to Newton Cable TV and were on their program, and
John was on Fox.
And
many others. I think Deborah Baronis was, anyway, it got a lot of media coverage. It had the Globe article because it is such a an important subject, but also compelling in the way it was handled too.
Yes, yes, very good process, you know, very interesting results. And, you know, this is a perfect example of trying to make meaning and of communicating one's time. You know, those of us who are artists that are, how are our voices, you know, communicating our time and the challenges of our time? Are we contributing to that conversation? And, you know, that's something that's important to me. I know that's important to you too, Jodi.
I think this might be a good time to segue into some of the questions that have come through. So first off, we have a question for you, Merill, from Rebecca Tuck. And her question is, for your large piece, do you work plan out your large quilts with a drawing, or do you work intuitively as you go? Is there an order in which you begin? They are so large that I'm interested in how you begin your plan.
So certainly the concept for me comes first, and then the elements, you know, that I think are, you know, would help with that sense of progression. In this particular project, we sent Beth sketches. So Beth wanted to see, you know, a sketch and a tentative size. Everything had to fit in a particular room. So before I even left the initial meeting at the Fuller, I needed to know the ceiling height because I knew I was going to do something with verticality. And then, so there are sketches along the way, but I don't work on a grid. So a lot of artists have the entire concept completed in advance, and then they grid it out, and they know they represent a smaller drawing. Cartoon becomes a plan for the final. And I don't work in that way, but I work in a looser way of sketching, and all the way along sketching. And taking photographs of it and looking at it on a smaller scale on the screen to see if it's graphically representing what I think it's working on, what it's representing. But a lot of it happens in the throwing the materials on the floor. So these materials were thrown on the floor, and then they get woven together visually.
I would like to add that you have a very strong design sense and color sense too. So that's all part of your decision making, don't you think?
Thanks.
Yeah, friend.
Yeah, friend. I paid her, yeah, to say that. Thank you, Jodi.
Merill, we have another question for you from Janet Bednars. She asks, what is composted fabric or composted?
Composted, right. So I am really interested in methods of destruction of textiles as representative of our life cycle, and also the challenges that would get thrown at us that knock us off our feet, and we have to put ourselves back together again afterwards. So, and I've been a composter, oh gosh, I don't know, 40 something years, where all of my leaves and all of my kitchen waste, I've just composted forever. I've even brought home bags of compost from like vacation and stuff. I'm an avid composter and recycler. So like 99% of my materials, actually, the textiles themselves had another life. So they're taken apart and they're changed in some way, or my language gets applied to them, and then they're reconfigured in a way that also expresses me. But so I actually have a big compost bin, and I'll take big pieces of fabric and lay it into the compost bin, and the foodstuffs will stain the fabric, and the worms eat the fabric, and then I launder them, and they become evocative of natural processes or deconstructive processes. So they're literally composted and then laundered in a big basin outdoors.
And then you stitch them back together.
And then I stitch them back together again. So one thing that happens is I usually use fabric that already has a visual on it. It's another designer's work. So it's toile or it's chintz or, you know, flowery chintz or whatever is another designer's work. And it isn't necessarily my language. And I don't want to take someone else's work necessarily and use it without their permission. So it gets composted, and that narrative, whatever that narrative or that logic to that pattern, I reassemble in a different way according to my sense of logic or my healing, my repairing.
Worms.
Yes.
We have another question here. This one is from Jessica Burko. She says, congratulations to you both. And Jodi, you mentioned color in the works, and in looking through the virtual tour, many of the works are more monochromatic. I'm wondering if the color choices you made in creating the work were inspired from the stories from your people, or if it was bringing your own aesthetic to the project.
Well, sometimes it's difficult to divide those two things, because whether you realize it or not, your aesthetic is making an influence. However, in this situation, I was very interested. One of the reasons why I sought clothing from individuals who I spoke to, I was an artist in residence at Society of Arts and Crafts. So it was sort of like in a fishbowl in my studio there, and people would come by, and that's where I had many, many conversations, and people would come back with their clothing. And I saw this as a way to create a situation where I could receive as many diverse pieces of clothing, fabrics, patterns, colors. In other words, if it came from my closet, it would all be black, but I didn't want it to just be my closet. I wanted it to represent as wide a variety of the population as possible, because this disease affects everybody. Nobody is immune from this. Everyone is vulnerable to the effects of this. So that's why you see so many different colors, because I collected hundreds, really many hundreds of different items of clothing from very different people I don't even really know sometimes, some of them at all. Most people I didn't know. And so that sort of lent itself to the variety that we saw. It struck me as I was working on it, how here I was feeling very somber in the subject matter and the concept, but how alive, I would do little tests and they would be so alive and vibrant. It always caught me off guard, like, whoa, how is this happening? But then I realized why it was happening, and I played off of that and just collected more and more diverse pieces.
Jodi, correct me if I'm wrong, but my recollection is that you also took the responsibility of being an ambassador about this issue really to heart, and you were having these conversations with people in part because it made your project broader. It gave it a wider impact, and so their participation in your project meant that was another conversation about this really important topic.
Exactly. It's that thing we talk about when Merill and I both like to do sort of collaborative interactive projects, public artworks, and that aspect that she was just talking about is that interactive collaborative part of this piece, to bring in public. And what I love about it is I'm not controlling it I am controlling it in that I'm asking for clothing and I'm making poppies and things like that, but I'm not putting any sense of control on where it comes from. I'm allowing that to organically grow on its own and then just come together. And I don't know, that's important.
We have a more general question about other forms of fiber art, knitting and weaving. Do either of you participate in knitting and weaving?
Oh, I do.
Mm-hmm.
How do you answer that? Well, my whole life I've been a traditional fiber artist, and by that I mean I'm a lifelong knitter. I've taught it for 15 years. And, in terms of how to make a garment and those sorts of things. I'm a new student of weaving, as you can see back here. So I'm very interested in traditional techniques and have spent a lifetime exploring them. In fact, in my COVID isolation, I took the opportunity of my extra time to learn many other techniques that I've been curious about. So, and they always end up as part of a material-based conceptual sculpture somewhere along the line. I don't know if that answers that, but. How about you, Merill?
I would say that I mostly use textiles, but use textiles maybe in a variety of ways. So I also really love garment construction, not necessarily even garments to wear, but symbolic garments, deconstruction, reconstruction of them, and but I alter, almost all of my clothing in some way. But my other medium really is painting and drawing. And there's a nice balance there. There's a nice relationship between drawing and painting about the topics, the concepts of what the textiles represent. So there's a nice relationship between the two. So sometimes I'll have multiple elements in an installation, and there might be a big drawing painting on the wall instead of a textile, and then textiles on the floor and textiles on a piece of furniture.
I also have create sculptures out of knitting and weaving. And I know there are a lot of textile artists out there who that might be their primary approach to their textile work. So we all just use the tools that we find to be most expressive for what we're trying to do.
For both of you, could you tell us if and how working on human impact informed your recent work?
I think every time, this is something that we talk about a lot, actually, is the work that gets generated from your heart, or the seeds of ideas, or like work that's generated from the self. I might call it autobiographical narrative, whatever, like from the self, versus work that is in response to context, to a community, to an individual, to a topic, to a history, and trying to juggle that in our practices, because they're very different things. And so have we had enough time to listen to our hearts this year, or have we been spending most of our time responding to external stimuli or context? But every time I do work that is in response to context, I learn new things that I then take to my next projects. So in the middle of this project, of this journey, I think even Jodi, when you came to the studio, I had thrown on the floor,
Right.
like, a sort of what, it's on the floor, but it'll eventually be up, and like a totem of garments and the textiles that would be providing the surrounding those garments, and talking about the next sense of what is a hierarchy, a visual hierarchy in textiles and clothing. So I think for me, it always gives me something that I take on to my future projects.
For me, well, see, Merill and I already knew going into Human Impact that one of our preferred ways of working is to do things in response to an issue and to incorporate the community and to interact. We knew this already, so that's why this was such a perfect project for us. However, I don't know that I've been involved in something so comprehensive as this on such a universally important subject as this, and it has reached as many people as this. So working on human impact for me reinforces the fact that, I'm doing a lot of thinking lately in isolation, and so we're all rebuilding our lives. And for me, it's what I'm letting go of and what I'm keeping. Well, I'm keeping human impact, and I want more of this. This is what I want. And so that's what human impact and COVID has done for me. Unfortunately, COVID, but you know what I mean? So it's not like changing the way I create or how I respond or what my concepts are, except that I want to do more of this public art, issues-based, interactive, collaborative work. Does that make sense?
That's a nice way to come back around to what we were saying at the beginning, that, we think that art, it does, and visual communication does have power, and that it's important to use our visual voices. And it's really important to both of us that we facilitate other people's voices as well. So we want to make opportunities for other people.
We talk about how much navel gazing goes on, right, with us. Like, oh, this is how I feel. You know, sometimes we feel that way with our work. And this is how, this is why I like this work, because it's for something bigger. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's, you know, I think it helps people other people communicate. It helps other people make meaning out of the experiences of their lives. And that gives us a sense of meaning. That gives us a sense of connection. We're alone in our studios working all the time.
Yeah.
This is taking, you know, our impulse, our ability, or whatever, our ability to perceive and understand, and it's making threads of connection with communities of other people. It's such an honor, really, to have an opportunity
To have
like
a purpose, to be able to create and build, because, you know, as a sculptor, I'm interested in making things. So to have a purpose that's so meaningful, to be able to exercise that is a really big deal. And then there was something else, and of course now I forget it. So I'll just interrupt you in a minute. But
Yeah. So, but we do want, I know we both want to make sure that Fuller Craft, the staff, Beth, Titi, everybody at Fuller Craft really realizes how appreciative we are, and that we were given this opportunity, and what a grand job you did, and a lot of moving parts. And from before the work was made to the work being made, through the opening exhibition and beyond. Like, it's been this incredible.
and there was a symposium,
Yeah.
and you know, we worked with Stonehill College where the students were involved, and it had many levels. It was great.
We had a great partnership team, for sure.
Yes. But the ideas, like, you had to have those ideas and that vision, Beth, to start with. So the seed was a really good impulse, I think, really successful, or you're successfully manifest that idea.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Wow. Well, I think that's a wonderful way to end our conversation for today. I'd like to thank both of our artists, Merill, Jodi. Thank you so much for sharing with us.
Thank
really
you.
Thank you.
Yes, yes. And thanks to our chief curator, Beth McLaughlin, for conceiving this wonderful exhibition and also participating with us today. So I'm going to show a couple of slides, and I'll leave them up on the screen. If you'd like to know more about our two guest artists, you can go to their websites. And also, we have a special treat. Jodi Colella has put together a how-to video for her poppies. So if you too would like to make poppies along with Jodi Colella, you can watch this video. It has a wonderful music track. I will tell you that right now. It's a wonderful video.
My son did that.
It's a lot of fun. And I will put the link into the chat box as we depart. I'd like to thank everyone who joined us today. Thank you for coming. Thank you for your attendance and your questions. And we look forward to seeing you at the next Craft Chat. Thanks so much, folks.
Bye. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Bye.